Since many of you already know which stand and which Requiem stand they'd get, I think it's time to find out where you would use it. This led me to the question, in what part of Jojo's Bizarre Adventure do you belong? And at first this may seem like a very generalistic question, but if you take a deeper look at every part individually, you will see that it becomes more and more apparent in which part what kind of person belongs. So, let's try to answer the question, in which part would you belong? And to answer this question, we first have to take a look at what makes every part so unique. And I'm sure we all know that there are a lot of things that make every of the JoJo's parts so different. But I'm talking about something not so subtle here. Did you know that every JoJo's Bizarre Adventure part represents one life value? I'll get into more detail as we get to each part. But generally speaking, the protagonist always represents this value the most. The question now is, what do you value most in life? Let's start with part 1. We all know that Jonathan is a very righteous person. Everything he does, he judges to be right. And this is the value that part 1 represents. To Jonathan, there's nothing that matters more. This is even why he starts to fight Dio, as Dio is the complete opposite of what he represents. But what exactly do I mean by being righteous? There's a significant difference between being righteous and between being just. Something that seems right might not serve justice, or the other way around. For example, let's say someone who's close to you is murdered. Revenge might not be the right thing to do, but it might be justice. And of course now it's the question if this is the thing that you value the most in life. So, do you have a strong sense of righteousness? Is your sense of this strong enough to overwhelm your feelings? And does it influence your day-to-day life? If so, you might belong in part 1. But maybe you don't value righteousness as much as having fun in life. Maybe you cope different with stressful situations. Bringing some sort of humor into every situation that is kind of stressful to you might help you to get along better. If so, you might belong into part 2. Joseph is the most comedic of all of the JoJos. Most sinister and dangerous situations are underlined by him making some sort of joke or goofy action. He is known and loved for his special technique to just run away. And coping like this is totally normal. To some people, humor is a kind of escape. This can take many forms. For example, people that have depression oftentimes act funny and open around other people, when deep down they are deeply hurt. So if either of those things apply to you, you might belong in part 2. And at this point I just want to say, if you feel depressed and you cover it up with funny jokes or anything, talk about it. Even to me, it's fine. Join the Discord, you can just DM me and tell me what's wrong. This is a personally very important matter to me, so please talk to someone. Now let's move on to part 3. And the value represented by part 3 is the value of friendship, or in general relationships with other people. Of course the family tree of the Joestars is most important in every part, but especially in part 3 it's a lot about relationships. The journey starts because Holly is sick, or rather cursed by her stand. However, they travel to save her. And of course she's the mother of the protagonist Jotaro. And Jotaro has a little problem with relationships. His character is very deep, so I won't go into much detail, but generally speaking, he wants relationships, but he has a hard time to basically form them in a nice and correct way. But of course there's the established group of the Stardust Crusaders. They form a deep bond, and of course in the end there are tragedies of death. So if the relationships that you have in this world are the most important thing to you, then you might belong in part 3. I personally am rather antisocial, so it's not really a thing for me. But of course I value my relationships to close friends and family very strongly. If you couldn't identify with any of the previous values, you might belong into part 4. As part 4 represents just living a day-to-day life. And what I mean by that is that you just go through your day without thinking of the future much and without thinking of the past much. Basically just living right now. This value is strongly shown by part 4 kind of feeling like a sitcom. Everyone who watched part 4 probably noticed this. For some people this might seem off, but generally speaking it just shows a more realistic life, as not every day and every moment there's something crazy happening. So if you're a person that just lives in the present, you probably belong in part 4. Next is the value of justice, represented by part 5. While talking about part 1, I explained what I mean with justice. And of course it's strongly represented by Giorno, whose whole journey starts because he wants justice in Italy. So if everything that you do is just, in your opinion, you might belong in part 5. And doing what you think is just includes going out of your way to achieve this, even on large scales like politics, minority rights, etc. So if you're an activist, you'll probably find yourself in part 5. The most obvious representation of a life value is probably the one about freedom. And of course, this is in part 6. Part 6 revolves around the Green Dolphin State Prison, which our protagonist Jolene is imprisoned in. She of course escapes into her freedom. Or not, because the end, I won't spoil it, but if you know, you know. On the other hand, we have the antagonist Pucci, who tries to take the freedom of anyone on the planet by creating a world that he designed. So, if you value freedom over everything else and you want to be completely independent, you'd probably perfectly fit into part 6. Something that kind of contradicts with freedom, but not entirely, is the value of self-improvement, which is represented by part 7. This again is really focused on the main character Johnny. Johnny starts off very arrogant as he's very successful in what he's doing, in being a jockey. But after his downfall due to a very serious injury, he's basically at his lowest point. And the whole story of Steel Ball Run is him improving to a good state of mind and overall improved life. This is also represented by his stand, which has 4 acts. Just as Johnny evolves, his stand does as well. So if you're constantly chasing your goals of improving yourself in any skill, form or whatever, you'd probably perfectly fit into part 7. Now moving on to part 8, and this is actually where I put myself, as the value that it represents is of very important matter to me. And this value is to find yourself, to know who you are and where you belong. I've struggled quite some time with this and sometimes do now as well. Thus why it's so important to me. Of course in part 8 it's represented by Josuke not knowing who he is, literally. He has no memory of his life, his name or where he belongs. The way I can relate to this also is the reason why I think part 8 is the greatest of all of the Jojo parts. And if you feel the same, if you sometimes don't know where you belong and who you truly are, and if this is very important to you to find out, you'd probably fit into part 8. Now it's your turn. Tell me in which part you belong. Tell me what your life values are. I'm really thrilled to know. And also if you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and consider subscribing. It would really help me out. Also join the Discord, I'll put the link into the description. Until then, see you next time and bye bye.